What is up, senders? Welcome back to another episode of Awaken with Bryan. I'm Henry, a show in which we dive into some expansive, insightful conversations with others, and most recently, sometimes with myself and with you all, of course. Insightful conversations that are had to assist you and the planetary collective consciousness in ascending to higher expressions of awareness, divine purpose, and infinite potential. So, whether you are checking this out on one of your favorite podcast platforms or you're tuned in live through YouTube or Facebook, I invite you to subscribe to the YouTube channel, to the podcast, if you wish to continue on this ascending journey with us. Inspired action is the catalyst. You must have heard this term, inspired action, take inspired, aligned action, come up in your quests to apply the law of attraction, to manifest your desires. Well, today we're going to be diving into how we are able to tune into that sense of inspiration and why, in the first place, taking this so-called inspired action is something that should be of interest to you. Let's start with this. This journey is just as much about giving the world your greatest gift, serving the highest purpose that you can serve, as it is about manifesting that which you want for you. See, I've seen things go too far off in either direction, where one on this path of spiritual growth come across this notion of service to others. And if you've been tuning in for some time, you'll know that I am all about service to others. I believe that our greatest experiences had in a mode of being in service to others, in service to the all. But this need not entail self-sacrifice. Let me say that again. Your journey of service to others and serving your highest purpose need not entail self-sacrifice. You do not need to sacrifice what you want for you. On the other end of the spectrum is being on this path of manifesting our desires. And some may come to think of being so focused on what we want for ourselves, these desires that we have for ourselves, as being a selfish thing. There's this idea thrown around in spiritual circles that we are to transcend our desires. Enlightenment is this desireless state. I personally believe that it's time to blur this line between selfish and selfless. That it can be both an experience of manifesting your truest desires and an experience of giving your greatest gifts. Because in oneness, to give is to receive. And when we live from this awareness that all is one, we too can bring into awareness the truth that that which is the greatest thing that you can do for others is one and the same with the greatest thing that you can do for yourself. And if you are finding this hard to believe, that it can be both a journey and path of creating what you want for you, manifesting your wildest dreams, what's desired at the soul level, and at the same time, serving the greatest purpose that you can serve, giving this world your greatest. Well, then, I'm hoping that this discussion around tuning into and taking inspired action can support you. Because when we are in alignment with this, I have felt it, and I know many of you have as well. We know. We know that it can be both of these things. We know that this is one and the same. And it's through cultivating this momentum in taking aligned action, tuning into that inspiration, that we are able to set into that sense of knowing that this is the best thing for me to do for others and for myself. So how do we tune into this? How do we know? How do we feel that sense of knowing? How do we know what that next best step is? I'll say again, it's a practice of being aware of and aligned with in our thoughts and our actions, both our highest calling, that which we feel most inspired to do, and that which is of our deepest wisdom. Both of these things. And as that momentum starts to build in taking action on that, again, that sense of knowing becomes more clear. But what if you're feeling uncertain? What if you're yet to cultivate this momentum? Take your best guess. That might not be what you want to hear, but let me explain to you why it's just about the perfect thing. That when you are feeling a sense of uncertainty around what the aligned action is, well, then the aligned action is to take your best guess, because that will always pay greater reward than staying still. When you take your best guess on what you feel like could be the best course of action towards your highest aims, even if that action seems to render to be fruitless, even if that step ends up being something that feels like hasn't progressed you towards your goals in retrospect, what taking your best guess does is unfolds an experience in which you've learned, in which you've experienced, and you've learned. You will better understand what the next best step is in taking that next best guess. But staying still will always mean staying stagnant and stuck in one place. Through action, we cultivate momentum. And if you aren't yet confident in a sense of knowing around this is the best step for me to be taking, well, then recognize that the best step for you to be taking is to take your best guess. And I assure you that in that practice of doing, learning from your experience, learning from what you're met with in each step of the way, then the momentum starts to get cultivated. That momentous feeling of, yes, this is the right way for me to go, until you come into that deep sense of knowing that that next step that you see before you is the aligned action that is moving you towards your aims, that is serving your highest purpose. And that feeling of inspiration too begins to rise. You start to feel more passion, more excitement. Better gets better the more you cultivate this momentum. Now, I also want to throw in here that don't think that this doesn't mean, or if you ever do come across a point in which you feel a little bit of a setback, that's okay too. Because the best we can do is bring our best into this moment. And if that means, if that has to follow a little bit of a setback, by all means. But in and of this moment, you bring your best to it. That's the aligned action. That's the catalyst. And let's get into why it is, how it is that it works this way. It's come to be my belief that this inspiration, this sense of inspiration, is the means by which we tune into the guidance of Source, the guidance of our higher self. I believe that feelings of inspiration is our higher self guiding us to and along our highest path. And this, of course, is just a belief, something I place my faith in. Now, I have reason to place my faith in that, and I want to support you in discovering this for yourself. But whether this speech is true or not, whether this is really coming from some sort of higher intelligence, some higher perspective that goes beyond the thinking mind, that sees beyond the thinking mind, what I'll say to this is, in my personal experience, it hardly matters if it's true or not, because it just seems to work. It just seems to work. Acting on what feels inspiring, what feels exciting. And it works because of two things, for two reasons. One, it is just inherently enjoyable. You can't go wrong acting in ways that are aligned with your joy. I don't think you can go wrong with this, because that is inherently enjoyable. Now, if that wasn't reason enough, this approach, in my experience, also leads to better results. Because there's the enjoyment that we reap in and of this moment, but then there's also what's going to set me up for success. What is going to lead me to where I want to be and create for what I want. It is of my experience that taking inspired action is the catalyst for what it is we really want. Because I've been in two places, two states. I've seen what the alternative is like. And there is a huge difference between acting in a place where one is trying to fight to make things happen, coming from a place of ultimately scarcity, lack, thinking that there's something we're supposed to do that isn't truly in alignment with what is wanted in and of that moment, or not bringing the degree of presence that one can bring to this moment. So let me say that again. There's a big difference in fighting with your reality to make things happen, not truly finding enjoyment, not truly being present with what is being done, than there is with bringing your presence, allowing your enjoyment, and acting on what feels truly inspiring and exciting in the end of this now. And from my experience, when I am acting in a state of joyful creation, taking inspired action in a state of joyful creation, this always, always, always leads to better results. I've been both of these states as it pertains to living out my purpose, building my business, trying to make an income, trying to make these results, create these results, manifest these desires, but the underlying state being one of scarcity, misalignment, this pushing, not enjoying, not truly enjoying. And then it just so seems that when I'm in contrast to this, enjoying what I'm doing, present with what I'm doing, operating with a sense of flow and ease, ironically, it seems that there's less thinking about the results in this state, and yet the results happen for me. I can look back at different chapters in my life where I've been in both of these very vastly different states, types of states, and I've seen the way that this plays out, and I just have so much reason to believe that living in a state of presence and joyful creation is the catalyst for everything that we truly desire and giving this world the greatest that we have to give it. It's when I'm in such a state that I find more people coming to me looking for support. I see greater success in my desire of building my business, helping more people, having a greater impact. I find connections and relationships, more fulfilling connections and relationships, find their way to me. And there's this less efforting needed, this lesser sense of effort.
This is a reminder.
I really need to learn to turn off my Alexa reminders in the middle of these streams.
Here are the next 4 reminders.
Alexa, stop it. She's always listening. In a state of joyful creation, better results in my business, more clients, more heartfelt, meaningful connections, interactions. This is the law of attraction taking place, but it's the underlying energy and feeling that gets projected into what you do, what you create. And this is why acting on and from a place of inspired action leads into greater success in our endeavors, a greater sense of fulfillment, and inherently a greater sense of joy. And I say again that this I've come to believe is the catalyst. Now, I don't want you to just believe me. I don't want you to hear this and try to just believe it to be true, because that's not what this is about. What this is about is the momentum that you may get to cultivate in giving this a shot. Don't just blindly believe me or anybody else in whatever they say or share, but be willing to experiment, be curious, be open-minded. And the invitation here is give this approach a shot and see what happens for you. Let your experience be the evidence of what works and what doesn't. And to be clear here, the approach that I invite you to consider is to act only on what feels inspiring, and at the same time, being attentive to your deepest wisdom and cultivating some momentum in taking that inspired action. And if you ever don't feel certain around what that aligned action is, that next best step, well, like I mentioned, take your best guess, because moving always leads to greater return on the journey of actualizing our highest purpose and desires than staying still. And hey, what's the worst that can happen? If you do give this a shot, the worst that can happen is you say maybe give 2 weeks of doing what you actually feel like you want to do and look back at it and feel like it didn't get you anywhere towards your aims. Is that all that bad, really? 2 weeks of doing what you really want to do, but not making any progress? That's a healthy question to consider when looking at a path. What's the worst that can happen? Often it's not nearly as bad as we may think or may feel before considering that question. So that's my invitation to you. To give, acting only on inspired action, a shot, and see what this approach has in store for you. Ascenders, that is going to be it for today's content. But before we sign off here, our limiting beliefs are often the reason why we can't tune into what feels inspiring, what feels true, what feels of our deepest wisdom. These, I find, act as these layers that suppress in us our highest knowing, or our inner knowing. And this is all happening at a very subconscious level. We create these programs, these ideas, these beliefs that get stored very subconscious to the thinking mind. And this can have a way of impeding in us a sense of knowing, making it feel unclear. Learning to access and work with the subconscious mind to, one, bring awareness to these beliefs so that we can then let them go, is a means by which we create for the shifts within our mindset that allows for us to more naturally connect to our intuition, to that sense of knowing. And so, one thing that I'd like to offer you is a bit of guidance in the process of accessing these subconscious beliefs and invoking these shifts. Because what I have found is that, and by the way, this is very excitingly something that is becoming scientifically documented and observed. Getting into a meditative state allows for us to more readily access the contents of the subconscious mind, as well as reprogram what's occurring there. By shifting into slower brainwave states, in meditative states, we are able to access and shift the limiting beliefs that are happening on a subconscious level. And it's through this work, this inner work, that we are able to reprogram ourselves, resolve these blocks, and once again, access our deepest wisdom where all the answers lie. The answers that you are looking for can only be found within. What it is you truly want, what is of your highest purpose, and what's the next best step for you to take. And if you'd like to be supported in creating for this shift so that you can come to these answers that are found within and align with them, well, that's the guidance I offer through an alignment activation session. This is a one-on-one alignment activation session that I'll guide you through the process of coming into that meditative state, accessing the subconscious mind, and invoking reprogramming so that you can find clarity around your desires, your highest vision, and your highest purpose. So if you'd like to take me up on that offer, I do offer the first session complimentary, and I'd love to support you. So there will be a link, whether you're watching this on Facebook, YouTube, your favorite podcast player, there'll be a link to book in for one of those in the description to this episode. But anyways, Ascenders, that is going to be all for this one, the Awaken podcast. Thank you for tuning in. And until next time, keep ascending.